So will it be these stocks that keep the markets rising even higher? We might even also have some positive news out of the G7 meeting when it comes to EU and the U.S. in a trade deal.
Yeah, well, the math suggests it has to be. I would say 250, 300 S&P points a month ago. Tim said that the pay and trade was higher, and it's playing out in front of us. And in terms of these stocks, again, it sort of has to be these stocks that can continue. It's just the names, which names sort of make sense. I think Oracle, which we've talked about for a while, I think right before our eyes, it's gotten itself expensive. But IBM, if you look at the quarter they just put up and you look at the valuation, look at the businesses they're getting into, Steve Grasso talks about quantum computing. At 25 times next year's numbers, despite the move, I think IBM is the one that could catch people continually by surprise.
So the Mag 7, I think, some of them I think of value stocks even outside of the move they've had. I still think of them as somewhat in value territory. So if you look at a name like Meta, the biggest position, I think it's protected from a lot of the issues that plague the rest of the market. And so I don't, no tariffs. The balance sheet's in extraordinary shape. The margins are incredible. So I'm hanging with those. They're getting a little more expensive to me. The most expensive one is actually Netflix. That's the hardest one for me to hang on to.
Yeah, I mean,
sold upside calls. Doesn't work.
We've also been helped by this sort of re-ignition of the AI trade.
Yeah, absolutely.
NVIDIA CEO last week was all across Europe making partnership deals with a bunch of companies. I mean, there's a lot of buy-in that the AI trade is not over.
I think that's right. I think we were reinvigorated by, kind of call it the sovereign AI trade. We were reinvigorated by the reality that from NVIDIA's numbers, which came really well after the big move in the markets, we had a chance to really not only hear reaffirmation from NVIDIA, but we haven't heard anything different. In fact, the hyperscalers have kind of doubled down. We've had a couple of data center and kind of energy deals around AI energy demand, and we've heard from Constellation, we've heard from Microsoft. So I think that's all very important, and the market needs this leadership to go to all-time highs. It doesn't mean you can't have a great market without the tech leadership, but I get back to, and if you're doing relative kind of performance trades or doing those graphs at home, if you graph the triple Qs by the SPY, you get to the high we were back in July, which is essentially 0.89. We're almost right there again, which would mean, could you be getting relative leadership by the group that really takes you high? The outperformance by semis from the low of markets from April 8th is about 23% to the S&P. That's all you need for markets to continue to move higher. Doesn't mean that I think you don't think about all the things we think about every day in terms of where AI and DeepSeek, and really post-DeepSeek, the world's a different place, and yet it's not.
Yeah, it's notable, though, 4 of the Mag 7 are still down in the year. Apple obviously trades very poorly. Google trades very poorly. Tesla trades very poorly on a relative basis, right? And so they've come a long way. When Tim just mentions the ratio of the S&P, relative to semis, semis have doubled up the performance of the S&P 500 off the bottom. The NASDAQ 100 is up about 32%. And I guess you got to ask yourself, is like, what's the ump? What's the thing? What is this not discounting, right? And so at this point, I mean, it's been a tremendous rally in such a short period of time. But, if you look at a Meta, here's a great example that everyone loves it. Karen loves it. And, I look at this, consensus expectations for earnings and sales growth are basically 13%, right? And so I say to myself at 24, 25 times, it's really not that cheap. You said margins are beautiful. They are beautiful. They're 81% or something like that. So I think that you have to make a bet that we're going to have earnings revisions higher for these groups. And you might. I mean, that's the thing. If you start to get these kind of return on investment and these use cases and all this stuff play out, I mean, I'm still a little skeptical that that's a 2025 thing. And maybe you see earnings revisions higher, and maybe Meta does prove to be really cheap. Maybe Google gets by some of these headwinds, and that is the cheapest one. I'm just not so certain right here.
Well, for Meta, I think they are just spend right now. And this multiple is off of a run rate of spend. So if at some point they will slow down the relative spending, which I believe will happen, and the efficiency starts to come through, then I think that Meta will look very cheap here at some point in the future. Not that distant future.
Yeah, Meta also had some news today that they're maybe finally monetizing WhatsApp somewhat more with it, ads at least being displayed. And there are so many different levers they seem to be able to pull, and they are definitely in the pole position in terms of the digital ad world. I think it's also notable that Google really quietly over the last month has maybe been the best performer of that group other than NVIDIA. And it gets back to, again, where I just think people got so negative on certain thematic elements of people have questioned the livelihood of some of the biggest companies in the world multiple times in the last 3 months. And I think that's proven to be wrong.
We got to get to that, what is it, Karen, about 740 level in Facebook that we saw earlier this year, number one. Looks like it's going to get there. The efficiencies have been there, though. I'd say for the last 4 or 5 quarters from Facebook, you've heard how AI has helped them in terms of their margins. So they are getting the ROI in the back of it for sure.
All right.